Welcome to week 3 of seeing how far $80 stretches for one person. This week I started off with a little bit of a grocery haul. I got 18 eggs, a pack of chicken thighs with the bone on, a can of spinach, and 1 jalapeno. This brings our total to $80 exactly. Now, starting off, I also made a double batch of that bread that I made in the first video. I will post that video up above, a link to it, if you want to know a little better how to make this bread. But this is basically a double batch of it, and this used the last of our yeast and a good bit of our flour, but it's going to really help us stretch things a little further. With this double batch of bread, I made 2 little mini loaves. They're about 3 by 4 inches, and just let those rise. I also decided to try my hand at making some homemade pretzels, so I rolled these out and then just kind of twisted them until they looked like they were in the form of a pretzel. My pretzel flinging and forming abilities aren't anywhere close to what an Auntie Annie's employee is, but I do feel like these turned out quite well, if I do say so myself. I wound up making 2 pretzels, then I took 2 balls of dough and made 2 breadstick forms. I also took 4 different pieces of dough and just tied those dough into a knot. I wound up making 4 of those, then set that pan aside to start rising. I want them to double in size. I made 3 balls of dough that I flattened, and 2 of those are going to end up being English muffins, and 1 of them is going to be a bun. Then I made 4 bagel shapes because I plan on making bagels, and 1 that I plan on turning into a kind of a hoagie roll. I set those aside to double in size, and once they had finished rising, I took them out of my oven where I was keeping them to rise. You can see they really doubled in size there, and preheated my oven to 350 degrees and then popped everything in to bake until they had turned a nice brown. I also went ahead and fried up those English muffins. If you have watched the first video, you know how to do that already. And I know bagels are normally boiled, so I did take a pan of water, added in 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, and once that had started boiling, I popped all of my bagels in for about 5 seconds on either side, turned them, and then let it cook another 5 seconds on the other side, and then I popped those back into the oven and baked for another 5 to 10 minutes just to get that glossy color on the outside. I know you're supposed to boil them before you do all of the baking and everything, but I was kind of afraid that they would deflate as I popped them into the water. I just have never made bagels before, but these turned out quite well. I also made a second batch of mayonnaise, which the first video will show you how to make that as well. For day 15 breakfast, I decided to make some drop donuts with 1/4 cup of flour, 1/8 of a teaspoon of baking soda, a little dash of salt, 1 tablespoon of egg. I just scrambled the egg and poured 1 tablespoon in, and we set the rest aside for other things. I added 1/4 teaspoon of vanilla, 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, added a tablespoon of oil, a tablespoon of sugar, and a tablespoon of water, and it mixed everything together. This should form a really thick batter, which we will use a cookie scoop, or you can just use 2 spoons to pour this into your pan. As you can see, the dough is really thick here. I had a pan getting ready with some hot oil in it, and in a separate bowl I put a tablespoon of sugar and 1/2 a teaspoon of cinnamon, just to make like a little bit of cinnamon sugar to roll those donut holes in. Then I took 2 spoons and just spooned out little blobs of dough into that hot oil. It started sizzling up right away. I spooned several of those pieces of dough in, and then I used some tongs to kind of flip them. You'll see I let some of them go too far and they got a little bit burnt on the bottom, but that's okay. If I had more oil in the pan, they would be more round, but I am trying to use not too much of this oil because I want to still have plenty for the rest of the 2 weeks that we have left. I rolled those hot donut holes in our cinnamon sugar mixture and served it with a little side of pineapple with some pineapple juice. And you can see here's our donut holes. We have a really nice little breakfast right here. For lunch, I decided to do a fried chicken sandwich. Here's our bun that we went ahead and sliced in half and toasted on either side in our pan. Then I'm making the coating for our chicken with 2 tablespoons of flour, about an eighth of a teaspoon of garlic powder, eighth of a teaspoon of onion powder, and a little dash of salt. Here's our chicken thigh, which I cut off of the bone. I cut a fair amount of the chicken thigh off and then used that boneless piece as our filler for our sandwich. I just coated it really well, really pressed it into that flour on either side, and I got some oil hot in our pan and just fried this up on either side until it was fully done in the middle. It should be about 165 to 170 degrees internally, and I use my meat thermometer frequently to stab things to make sure that they've come up to temperature. On either side of that piece of bread, the bun, I just put a little bit of our homemade mayonnaise as well as a generous serving of ketchup on each of them. And then I also took some of that head of lettuce that we have in the fridge and spread a little bed of lettuce on one side, as well as I had that one onion that I hadn't frozen, and I sliced up a nice little slice of onion on one side as well. And here was our chicken sandwich that we had. This was absolutely delicious and very filling. It could have been a meal just on its own, but I did decide that I wanted to make up a little batch of corn fritters using some of our corn. This was actually suggested by someone from our last video. Queso Costa 69 suggested we make some corn fritters. So I'm taking 2 tablespoons of corn, a third cup of flour, a fourth cup of our juice. It's the juice from our corn, so it's going to add a little extra flavor and a little extra salt, a teaspoon of sugar, an eighth a teaspoon of baking soda, and just a dash of salt to bring out the sweetness and cut the sweetness in the corn fritters. I mixed everything together, and you see at first I added an eighth cup of the corn juice, and I ended up deciding to add the full fourth, as well as another tablespoon of flour. You can add a little flour if you see the mixture is too runny. Then I used a cookie scoop to spoon that into the hot oil. I used the same oil that I had just fried the chicken in, just to help make sure that I didn't let anything go to waste. Once I had seen that it turned brown on one side, I flipped those over using my tongs, and here we have our corn fritters. I served this with a little side of ketchup, and this one is a very large meal, so it really could be a dinner meal if you like to have your bigger meal for dinner, or you can have it for lunch like I did. And you just dip this the corn fritters in that ketchup, and you'll see what the inside look like. And I also decided to take our rotini pasta, the rest of that, and just cook that up to al dente and freeze that like I did at the beginning, because we'll be using some of that pasta in our next meal, which was suggested by Jingless1398. To our pot, we're adding a tablespoon of oil, a dash of garlic powder, a tablespoon of onion, and a tablespoon of our cooked up sausage. I also added a teaspoon of flour, which I stirred in to make sure it didn't get any lumps in it. I took a third a cup of our broccoli and chopped that up really finely, and then added a third a cup of water and mix that in. I then added a fourth a teaspoon of our chicken bouillon, as well as a whole cup of that cooked rotini. I served all of this up after everything had stirred together and combined really well, and heated through on a plate with a little bit of our shredded mozzarella. And here's our cheesy broccoli pasta. On day 16, I decided to make some heart-shaped breakfast pancakes using the remainder of that egg. It's about 2 tablespoons that I had cracked open for our breakfast on day 15. And the last of that pancake mix, it's about 1 cup worth of pancake mix. And I just mixed that together along with a half a cup of water and made a really nice thick batter, and took my pan, poured a little bit of oil at the bottom just to make sure things didn't stick, and spooned this into kind of heart-shaped patterns. The first one, of course, didn't quite turn out as well as some of the other ones, but I ended up making 4 pancakes. I took 2 of the pancakes for today, used about half of that syrup on those pancakes, and I also fried up an egg medium well on the side, and here was breakfast. This is right around Valentine's Day, so I was feeling in a heart-shaped mood today. For lunch on day 16, I took that rest of that chicken thigh that I had cut off a big part of it for that filet sandwich earlier and just popped that into our pan of water on the stove with about 2 cups of water. I set aside part of that chicken thigh and chopped it up really finely. It was about 1/4 a cup. Added a dash of garlic powder, a dash of salt. I took 2 heels of our bread, toasted it, and then chopped it up really finely and poured that in. It was about 1/2 cup worth of breadcrumbs or bread small pieces in the end. And we're making some meatballs in here. I mixed all that together, added a dash of Italian seasoning as well. I mixed that Italian seasoning in and formed about 5 little meatballs. I took a pan and let it heat over the stove, then put those meatballs in and just put a lid on just to help them steam all the way through and rotated them until they had browned on all sides. Then I added a 1/3 cup of water, 2 of those tablespoons of tomato paste, a teaspoon of sugar, a dash of Italian seasoning, and then let all of that thicken together. I also added a little dash of salt in, and here is our meatballs. I took that sub that I had made earlier, that hoagie bun, split it open, and then poured this mixture out on top and sprinkled about a tablespoon of our mozzarella cheese over top of that and served this alongside of a couple of carrot sticks as well as one of our mandarin oranges. And here is lunch. Dinner on day 16, I decided to make 2 pizza pretzels using 2 tablespoons of tomato paste, which I softened in the microwave, 2 tablespoons of water, a dash of Italian seasoning, 1/4 a teaspoon of sugar, a dash of garlic, and I just mixed everything all together until it formed a really nice sauce. Spooned that out onto either half of our pretzel, which I had sliced in half, spread it out evenly, and then I added the rest of our cheese on top. It ended up being about 3 tablespoons of mozzarella left. I also took 1 tablespoon of spinach from our can of spinach, drained that really well, and then sprinkled little crumbles of that spinach on top. I took 1/2 slice of ham and chopped that up really finely as well and sprinkled that on top too. And here we have our finished pizza pretzels. I took those, popped those under the broiler until they had gotten to my desired level of doneness, and here's dinner. This made a really filling but simple dinner that I could whip up really quickly. Breakfast on day 17 was even faster because it was the leftover egg bites. Remember, we made 12 and I only had 6 last week, so I had the remaining 6 along with a fruit salad. For lunch on day 17, I took that chicken bone that I had put into our 2 cups of boiling water, took it out, took whatever meat was off the bone, which was about a tablespoon, and 2 tablespoons of shredded carrots. I also added 2 teaspoons of chicken bouillon into those 2 cups of chicken broth along with another cup of water. In a separate bowl, I took a pinch of salt, a 1/3 cup of water, and 2 tablespoons of water, mixed all that together until I had a nice soft dough. I sprinkled about a teaspoon of flour onto my surface and rolled this out as thinly as I could, then took my pizza cutter and sliced this up. We're making some noodles for chicken and homemade noodles on here. I took off pieces of just slices of the noodle and dropped those in one at a time into our pot and let those simmer until they were tender, which ended up being about 15 to 20 minutes. Added a little dash of pepper, and we had some chicken and homemade noodles ready for lunch today. This was a really nice, comforting meal, which was perfect because I am getting over a little bit of a cold right now, so this helped me out a little bit. For dinner on day 17, I decided we should make some stuffing, so I took one of those loaves of bread and just cut that up into little cubes and popped that in the oven at 350 degrees for about 20 minutes, just stirring every once in a while to make sure nothing got too brown. In a separate bowl, I made a little mixture for the stuffing with a tablespoon of the chicken bouillon, a teaspoon of Italian seasoning, a teaspoon of garlic powder, a teaspoon of onion powder, and just mix that until it was combined. In my bowl, I poured my stuffing or bread mixture, which these had gotten really nice and hard and stale feeling, and sprinkled that mixture over top. Then I Just mixed everything all together. I could see that it wasn't sticking quite like I wanted it to, so I took a teaspoon of oil and just sprinkled that over the top to help everything to stick to the mixture, the bread mixture. Then I took 1 cup servings and popped those into 4 different Ziploc bags. It ended up being about 4 cups worth of stuffing. So I've got 4 servings of stuffings that I can set aside and make little individual meals with. I also wanted to prep the rest of the chicken with a teaspoon of garlic powder, a teaspoon of onion powder, a teaspoon of Italian seasoning, and a half teaspoon of salt. Then sprinkled that over top of our 3 remaining chicken thighs. That pack had 4 chicken thighs in it in the end, and just kind of mixed all those until they were well coated. Popped those onto a sheet pan with parchment paper and baked them at 350 for about 35 minutes or until they were cooked all the way through. I took the meat off the bones, then popped the bones into about 8 cups worth of water and made a really nice chicken broth and set aside that chicken. Now we can actually make dinner on day 17, which is going to be a simple sausage green bean stuffing using a tablespoon of our cooked sausage, 1/4 cup of our chopped onion from the freezer, 1/3 cup of green beans, 1/2 cup of water, which I would have reduced that to 1/3 cup, honestly, and then 1 of our bags of stuffing. Once all of those had come to a simmer, I popped the stuffing in at the end after everything had started to boil, and then I went ahead and mixed everything together, and here's our dinner. Our day 18 breakfast was suggested by True Brit, and we're making a little bit of a rice pudding using 1/2 cup of rice, which I microwaved until it was soft, 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon of vanilla, and then I used 1/4 cup of our creamer that we had made up. I would have probably reduced that to 2 tablespoons of creamer, 2 tablespoons of water, because I felt like the creamer made it just a little more sweet than I wanted. Once it had gotten to my desired level of thickness, I poured it into my bowl and put a little dash of cinnamon on top, and this was perfect. Day 18 lunch, we're making a little bit of a cumin chicken situation. We took 1/4 cup of our onion, popped that into a pan along with 1/4 cup of chicken that we had chopped up. I added 1/2 teaspoon of cumin powder, a dash of salt and pepper, and 1/3 cup of green beans, as well as 1/2 cup of water. Before that water started boiling, I added a teaspoon of flour in. I just wanted the sauce to thicken a little bit. So I put that in and stirred that really well so it wouldn't be lumpy. Then I added 1/4 teaspoon of our chicken bouillon in. I warmed up 1 of those pucks of brown rice in the microwave and then kind of mashed it down. Then poured our chicken and green bean mixture over top, and here is our lunch. Dinner on day 18 was suggested by Samantha Dodd 8112. I took a tablespoon of oil and poured that into my pan. To that I added 1/4 cup of chopped onions, 1/2 potato which I cubed up, 1/2 carrot which I sliced, a teaspoon of our jalapeno pepper, and about 1/4 cup of chicken into that pan as well, which I had also chopped. This is going to be a little bit of a stew situation, a chicken stew, and I just kind of stirred everything together and let that start cooking. Added 1/4 cup of water and a dash of salt and pepper just to help that sauce to thicken up. I also added a teaspoon of flour, which I slowly added in and stirred frequently so that it wouldn't become lumpy but would thicken that sauce up and really make it nice and just coat everything really well with that sauce. I deglazed the pan a second time with 1/4 cup of water and let everything cook down until everything was tender. I served this with a slice of bread with a little bit of margarine on it, and here is our chicken potato stew with our slice of bread, and here's dinner. For breakfast on day 19, I decided to do a little bit of a ham and egg scramble. I took 1 egg, just scrambled that, added a teaspoon of water, along with 1/2 slice of ham, which I had cubed up. I mixed all that together, then poured that into my hot skillet and just scrambled that together until the egg was fully cooked to my desired level of doneness. Then I sprinkled a little salt and pepper on top. I heated up the last two of our heart-shaped pancakes on the side, and then poured the remainder of our syrup, which is the last of our syrup, over the top, and here was breakfast. For lunch on day 19, I decided to make a little bit of egg salad. So I took 2 of our eggs and cooked those in a pot of water until they were hard boiled, which is for me about 10 minutes. Then in a bowl, I took 2 tablespoons of our homemade mayonnaise, and those 2 eggs, I had peeled them, and then I used a knife and chopped those up really finely. But you can chop them however you would like your egg salad. If you like a finer egg salad, you can chop them smaller. If you want it larger chunks, that's also fine. I added a dash of salt and pepper to this and then mixed it all together. And here was our egg salad. I kept it really simple. You could also put a dash of garlic powder in if you felt like it, or a little onion powder, or even some onions if you felt like it. But I kept this super simple, and it spooned out a little bit on each of my rolls, which I used those garlic knots, or I guess they're not garlic, but those knots that I had made, and sliced those in half, put a bed of our lettuce on top, and spooned out about half of that mixture on top. I had some left, and that's going to be lunch for one of the meals this next week. I popped the lids on both of those, and then had a little bit of an orange and 2 carrot slices on the side, just for a little extra color and a little extra veggie and fruit on the side. And here was lunch. For dinner on day 19, I took a half a cup of water, a fourth a cup of onion, the other half of that potato, which I had chopped up fairly small into very small cubes, 2 tablespoons of tomato paste from the freezer, a fourth a teaspoon of cumin, a fourth a cup of spinach, along with a teaspoon of our jalapeno, which I had kind of chopped up really finely. I mixed everything together and cooked it until the potato was cooked all the way through and it had thickened. I added also a little bit of salt. Then I toasted 3 slices of bread. One of them I put a little margarine on, and the other 2 I poured the mixture on top. I was going for a little bit of a reverse SOS, if you know what that is, but or at least a different take on it, with some tomato instead of a white sauce. For breakfast on day 20, I took 1 egg yolk, a half a cup of flour, a fourth a teaspoon of baking soda, fourth a teaspoon of cinnamon, a dash of salt, a fourth a teaspoon of vanilla, 2 tablespoons of oil, along with 2 tablespoons of sugar. I also added 2 tablespoons of our cooked sausage into this. We're making sausage muffins here. I added a fourth a cup of water and then mixed all of this together. I took 4 muffin tins or muffin liners and baked these in a 425 degree oven for about 12 minutes until they had fully cooked. And here are our muffins. I served this alongside of one of our little mandarin oranges, and you can see they're really hot, so they're hard to peel apart so that I can show you what they look like inside. But I had 2 of these for one breakfast, and I will have 2 more for a breakfast for next week. Now on day 20 lunch, I decided to make a veggie noodle soup using a 1/3 cup of flour, a 4th teaspoon of baking soda, a tablespoon, and I added a teaspoon of water. I might have needed to add a 2nd teaspoon, but I was able to get it rolled out really thin, and then cut these into some squares. Half of the squares I put on a parchment paper and baked those in the oven at 350 degrees until they were brown on all sides. Those will be our crackers for the soup. I added a tablespoon of chicken, tablespoon of carrots, a tablespoon of corn, a tablespoon of sliced green beans, and a tablespoon of onions, and a tablespoon of chopped broccoli. This is the chicken stock we had made with our leftover bones from those chicken thighs. I poured all that in. It ended up being about 3 cups of broth. I added a teaspoon of our chicken bouillon for a little extra flavoring, along with the rest of those little squares, which will be our noodles for this soup, and just let that boil all together for about 15 to 20 minutes, just until the noodles had gotten to my desired level of doneness. And here's our soup. Dinner on day 20 is going to be a little bit of a mini casserole. I took a half a cup of the brown rice and heated that until it was able to be mixed with other things. Added 2 tablespoons of mayonnaise, a tablespoon of onions, a tablespoon of chopped broccoli, a tablespoon of our cooked sausage, and 1/4 teaspoon of our chicken bouillon, along with a dash of pepper. I mixed everything together and then pressed it into this small ungreased tin that I had. It's a little mini casserole dish about 3 by 4 inches. Then I took a tablespoon of our stuffing mixture, just crushed that up until it was really fine, and sprinkled that on top for breadcrumbs, and put this in the oven at 350 for about 15 minutes, and then stuck it under the broiler for an additional minute to get the breadcrumbs nice and browned. On day 21 breakfast, we're going to be slicing open one of our bagels and toasting both sides of the bagel. Then I took an egg, cracked that into a pan with a little bit of oil, added some salt and pepper. You could do the whole ring trick with this one, but since the bagel's so big, I didn't mind it spreading out a little extra. Then I took a whole slice of ham, toasted it on either side, or I guess heated it through on either side, just until it gotten a little bit of marks and had heated all the way through. Then put that ham on our bread, which I had toasted in our pan as well. It was a little too thick to pop into the toaster oven. And here is our ham and egg bagel. This one was really delicious. I would make this again, and I'm thinking of making it again next week. Day 20 lunch was also suggested by True Brit, and she suggested doing a little bit of a pasta salad with some Italian dressing. So I took a whole cup of our Rotini, heated that up in the microwave until it had heated through, added 2 tablespoons of chopped broccoli, a tablespoon of matchstick styled carrots that I had chopped up, a tablespoon of chopped onion, a half a teaspoon of Italian seasoning, a half a teaspoon of sugar, a teaspoon of vinegar, and a teaspoon of oil, and then a dash of salt and pepper. Along with half a slice of ham, which I had chopped up. I mixed everything together, let it marinate and get cold in the fridge, and here was lunch. This was one of my favorite lunches we've made. For day 21 lunch, we're whipping up something real fast using 1/4 a cup of onions, 1/4 a cup of chopped chicken, 1/4 a cup of our spinach, and 1/3 a cup of water. Then I poured my stuffing mixture, one of those baggies, into that once it started heating up and bubbling, and stirred that all together. That stuffing soaked all of that delicious flavor up, and here is dinner. This whipped up really fast, so this is a perfect fast dinner. Now, we can't skip dessert just because we're on a budget. So you saw we used an egg yolk earlier. Well, I kept the egg whites aside and I whipped those up until they had reached stiff peak level. Then I poured 1/4 a teaspoon of vinegar and 1/4 a teaspoon of vanilla in, as well as 1/4 a cup of sugar. But that 1/4 a cup of sugar I added in very slowly so that I would have some stiff peaks and so the egg whites wouldn't fall flat. On some parchment paper, I spooned out small scoops of this mixture, about 1-inch scoops, and I preheated my oven to 200 degrees. Then I stuck in these little meringues, which this made quite a few meringues. It actually made 15 meringues into my oven for about an hour and a half. Once they pull up without any resistance from your parchment paper, that's when you know that they're done. And these were the perfect sweet addition throughout the week. Now, I believe next week is probably going to be the last week, but I wanted to show you what we have left. We have some onion, tomato paste, 10 of our eggs, a little bit of green beans, a little bit of broccoli left, some ham left, a little bit of carrot, a little bit of corn, that little container of homemade marmalade, a whole bunch of the spinach is left, a little bit of our jalapeno, or I guess most of it actually. Still some of that pineapple and pineapple juice, 6 of our oranges, about 1/4 of our head of lettuce is left still, a good amount of our bread. We still have 2 of those English muffins, several of those bagels and the breadsticks, all of our seasonings, fair amount of oil, a fair amount of flour. We got 2 of those packages of stuffing mixture, 1 potato, a little bit of our sausage, almost our whole stick of margarine is left, 1/2 a cup serving of brown rice, a little bit of chicken, as well as a good amount of our mayonnaise is left, and that's the egg salad on top of that mixture, which we will end up using this next week, along with about a serving of rotini and about a half of one of those onions. And here's everything we got left. What should I be making in this last week? Let me know below, and you might just get a shout out as I make your meal suggestion in the next video. Thanks for watching.